It is 1967. The world is in chaos. The Vietnam War dominates the headlines. Hippies flood San Francisco, chanting for peace. The Beatles release Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, changing music forever. And in Detroit, the horsepower wars rage hotter than napalm. The Ford Mustang has captured the youth. Chevrolet's own Corvette, the American sports car, faces pressure like never before. The Corvette has always been fast, but engineers at Chevrolet were about to create something that wasn't just fast. It was forbidden, a car so rare, so secret, that even Chevrolet discouraged buyers from owning one. A car so powerful it wasn't meant for the street at all. And yet, a handful of them escaped into public hands. This was the 1967 Corvette L88, but the L88 that collectors worship today hides stories most people never knew. Corporate cover-ups, secret racing programs, engines so wild they could destroy themselves on pump gas. Tonight we count down 20 things you didn't know about the 1967 Corvette L88 number 20. The L88 was never meant for ordinary buyers. When Chevrolet unveiled the option code L88 in 1967, they didn't advertise it. They didn't put it in glossy brochures. They didn't want teenagers, weekend warriors, or rich businessmen buying it on impulse. Why? Because the L88 wasn't designed for the street. It was designed for one purpose: racing. The 427 cubic inch big block under its hood was officially rated at 430 horsepower. But dyno tests revealed the truth. It was closer to 550 horsepower, maybe even more. It had 12.5/1 compression, forged pistons, an 850 CFM Holleycarb, and aluminum heads borrowed from racing programs. On paper, it was a monster. In reality, it was almost undrivable as a daily car. It demanded high-octane racing fuel. Ordinary pump gas would make it ping and rattle like a dying engine. It came stripped of comforts. No radio, no heater, no power accessories. Chevy didn't want casual buyers ordering an L88. They wanted racers. The twist? A few slipped into civilian hands anyway. And those few cars became legends. Number 19. Most people think Chevrolet was proud of the L88. But the truth is, stranger. Chevrolet actively tried to hide it. Dealers were warned not to sell L88s to casual customers. The company didn't want lawsuits, complaints, or blown engines from people who didn't understand what they were buying. In fact, Chevy went so far as to underrate the engine at 430 horsepower, less than the lesser L71 427 engine, which was rated at 435 horsepower. It was deception by design. A car that was actually more powerful was deliberately made to look weaker on paper. Collectors today call it one of the greatest corporate cover-ups in automotive history. Because while brochures suggested the L71 was king, insiders knew the L88 was the real monster. The power difference wasn't small. It was enough to dominate any drag strip in America. The irony? By hiding the L88, Chevrolet only fueled the mystery. For years, enthusiasts whispered about ghost Corvettes that were faster than the numbers said. And when the truth came out, the myth only grew stronger. Number 18. The L88 wasn't just a car, it was a secret weapon for Chevrolet's racing. Ambitions.GM had officially banned factory-backed racing in 1957 after a deadly crash at Le Mans shook public confidence. But everyone knew the ban was a sham. Engineers still built parts in the shadows, and dealers like Yenko, Baldwin Motion, and others acted as middlemen between factory and racetrack. The L88 was the ultimate loophole. On paper, it was just an option code for a production Corvette. But under the skin, it was designed with racing in mind. Aluminum cylinder heads cut weight. A transistorized ignition system kept sparks strong at high RPMs. The radiator was massive, designed for endurance events, not Sunday drives. Chevrolet never advertised it as a race car, but that's exactly what it was. Racers who got their hands on one found themselves with a car that could humiliate Shelby Cobras, Porsche 911s, even Ferraris. And yet, because Chevrolet couldn't officially say the word racing, the L88 lived in secrecy. Only 20 were built in 1967. 20 cars to carry the weight of Chevrolet's underground war. Number 17. The L88 Corvette came with an odd omission that puzzled buyers: no radio. In 1967, most American cars, even sports cars, offered radios as standard or optional equipment. Cruising down the boulevard with the Doors or the Rolling Stones blasting from the speakers was part of the muscle car dream. But the L88? Silence. Why? Chevrolet wanted every ounce of attention on performance. Radios added weight. Radios distracted drivers. And radios required electrical power that could be better used feeding the ignition system at high RPMs. To Chevy's engineers, rock and roll was noise. They wanted the only soundtrack to be the scream of that 427 big block at full throttle, of course, owners noticed. A few even tried to retrofit radios, only to find the car's electrical system ran so hot under load that it sometimes cooked components. In other words, the L88 wasn't just radio delete. It was hostile to the very idea of entertainment. The twist? Today, collectors prize this detail. An L88 Corvette with no radio proves its authenticity. What once felt like a flaw has become a mark of purity. Number 16. One of the most overlooked dangers of the L88 was its appetite for fuel. At a time when gas cost around 33 cents a gallon, most drivers didn't care about mileage. But the L88 wasn't just thirsty, it was ravenous. Estimates suggest the car got 5 miles per gallon under hard driving. That meant a full tank could vanish in less than 100 miles. Worse, it couldn't run on ordinary gas. Its 12.5-1 compression demanded ultra-high octane racing fuel. Pumping anything less into the tank wasn't just bad for performance, it risked catastrophic detonation. Imagine buying your dream Corvette, only to discover that the neighborhood gas station couldn't even feed it. Some unlucky owners learned the hard way. Fill-ups with low-octane fuel led to pinging, melted pistons, and destroyed engines. Chevy had warned them in fine print, but few casual buyers ever read it. This quirk turned the L88 into a car you couldn't really drive daily. It was a machine for the track, disguised as a production vehicle. And maybe that was the cruelest joke of all. The car of your dreams could empty your wallet, strand you at the pump, or blow up if you fed it the wrong gas. Number 15. The L88 was so secretive, even its paperwork told lies. When buyers ordered the option, the car's build sheet and window sticker didn't scream racing engine. Instead, they buried the details under vague codes and technical jargon. It wasn't until the hood was opened that the truth hit home. Even more bizarre, the L88's official horsepower rating was a deliberate deception. Chevrolet listed it at 430 horsepower at 5,200 RPM. That sounded impressive, but it was actually less than the L71 427 engine, which was rated at 435 horsepower. Think about that. Chevrolet made their most powerful engine look weaker than the one below it. Why? To discourage street buyers and to keep insurance companies from targeting the L88 with outrageous premiums. But dyno tests exposed the truth. L88s easily pushed past 550 horsepower, with some builds climbing toward 600. On the drag strip, this weaker engine destroyed everything in sight. The twist? By lying about the L88's numbers, Chevrolet accidentally created one of the greatest legends in muscle car history. The car that looked tame on paper became a monster in reality, a secret weapon hiding in plain sight. Number 14. The 1967 L88. Corvette had one of the strangest quirks in muscle car history. Chevrolet actually recommended you not drive it on the street. Buried in the dealer order forms and technical bulletins was a warning. The L88 package was intended for off-highway use only. It wasn't marketing hyperbole. It was a genuine attempt by Chevrolet to keep the car out of civilian hands. Why? Because the L88 wasn't built for comfort or practicality. It had no heater, no fan shroud, no choke mechanism for cold starts, no emissions equipment. In the dead of winter, you'd freeze. In traffic, you'd overheat. In a grocery store parking lot, you'd stall and foul plugs before you could load your bags. One journalist at the time famously wrote that the L88 was barely a car. It's a race engine with license plates. And yet, a handful of buyers ignored the warnings. They drove their L88s on the street anyway, suffering through boiling hot cockpits, brutal noise, and constant tune-ups. To some, that misery only made the car sweeter, proof that they were piloting a weapon meant for battle, not for errands. Today, collectors look back at those warnings with awe. Imagine a company selling you a car and telling you not to use it in public. That contradiction is part of what makes the L88 one of the most mysterious muscle cars ever built. Number 13. For a car built in such tiny numbers, just 20 in 1967, the L88 made a massive impact in racing. Corvette racers had been begging Chevrolet for a factory-supported weapon. The L88 was the answer, though officially, Chevy still denied involvement. But when those cars hit the track, the results spoke louder than any press release. At Daytona, Sebring, and even Le Mans, L88-powered Corvettes shredded the competition. Privateer teams, often running with little more than factory hints, dominated their classes. The cars were fast, durable, and terrifying to rival Marquez. The 1967 L88 was essentially a Trojan horse. Outwardly, it looked like any other Corvette. But beneath the fiberglass, it was a racing prototype disguised as a production car. The irony is that Chevrolet couldn't officially celebrate these victories. The corporate racing ban meant GM had to keep quiet while Ford bragged about GT40 wins, and Shelby shouted about Cobras. Corvette's dominance was an open secret, acknowledged in whispers, not billboards. But for those in the know, the L88 wasn't just another Corvette. It was the car that made America's sports car a global. Powerhouse number 12. If there's one thing the L88 proves, it's that Chevrolet was willing to lie to protect its secrets. We already know about the false horsepower rating, but the deception went deeper. When buyers picked up their L88s, they weren't told about the car's quirks, like the fact that it ran so hot it could bake the fiberglass hood, or that starting one in cold weather was nearly impossible. Some owners were caught completely off guard. Imagine paying thousands for the ultimate Corvette, only to discover it didn't even have a heater. One dealer in California reportedly had to buy back an L88 from an outraged customer who simply couldn't live with the car's racing temperament. And yet Chevrolet never apologized. The company's attitude was simple. The L88 wasn't for you. It was for racers. If you weren't ready, that was your problem. That arrogance only added to the legend. Because what other car in history was so brutal, so uncompromising, that the company actively misled buyers just to keep it in the shadows? The L88 wasn't just rare, it was forbidden fruit, and Chevy wanted it to stay that way. Number 11. One of the strangest details of the 1967 L88 Corvette wasn't under the hood. It was in the options list. Buyers who ordered the L88 discovered something bizarre. The car couldn't be equipped with many of the features people expected in a luxury sports car. No air conditioning, no heater, no power steering, no power windows, no fancy trim packages. Chevrolet deliberately stripped it bare. Why? Because every extra pound meant lost speed on the track. Every luxury feature was one more distraction from the car's purpose, to dominate races. This decision frustrated wealthy buyers who assumed the L88 would be just a faster version of the Corvette they already knew. Some even canceled their orders when they realized how Spartan the car really was. But to racers, this was proof of authenticity. The lack of comfort screamed, "This car is not for cruising. It was for winning." Today, when collectors inspect a supposed L88, the absence of those options is a critical clue. If the car has air conditioning or leather trim, chances are it's not the real deal. Ironically, the things buyers once hated are now the very things that prove the car's legendary status. Number 10. Insurance companies feared the L88 almost, as much as Chevrolet's executives did. By 1967, insurers were already cracking down on high-performance cars. Premiums for big-block Corvettes were rising, and young drivers found it almost impossible to afford coverage. The L88's official rating of 430 horsepower gave insurers one number. But word quickly spread in street racing circles. This car was hiding far more power. Stories circulated of insurance agents quietly refusing to write policies on certain VINs. Some L88 owners allegedly swapped VIN plates with lesser Corvettes just to sneak under the radar. It was a dangerous game, fraud, technically, but one that highlighted just how feared the L88 was. The consequence: fewer people dared to order. 1. Combined with Chevrolet's secrecy, this helped keep production numbers incredibly low. Only 20 were built in 1967, a figure that makes the L88 rarer than almost any other Corvette option in history. What was once an obstacle has now become its greatest asset. Today, that scarcity makes an authentic L88 worth millions. A car that once terrified insurers is now worshipped at auctions. Number 9. Among Corvette enthusiasts, myths swirl about the lost L88s. We know only 20 were built in 1967, but historians argue over how many still survive. Some estimates say as few as a dozen remain intact. Others suggest a few cars were wrecked, stripped for racing, or quietly destroyed by dealers after unhappy buyers returned them. Adding to the mystery are rumors of L88s that vanished overseas. Some believe privateers shipped them to Europe for racing, where they were driven hard and discarded. Others whisper about L88s lost in barns, forgotten by families who never realized the treasure sitting under a dusty tarp. One famous story tells of a farmer who used his L88 to haul hay on back roads, unaware of its rarity. Another legend claims a wrecked L88 was scrapped in the 1970s because no one wanted to pay for an engine rebuild. Whether true or not, these stories give the L88 an almost mythical aura. It's not just rare, it's elusive. Every time a new survivor surfaces, the Corvette world erupts in excitement as if a ghost has returned from the past. Number 8. The L88 Corvette didn't just dominate racetracks, it caused headaches in courtrooms. By the late 60s, a few civilian buyers who somehow got their hands on L88s began complaining. Engines failed after being fed ordinary pump gas. Transmissions blew under the strain. Some owners even suffered accidents, claiming the car was too unpredictable for street use. Lawsuits trickled in. One California case alleged that Chevrolet knowingly sold a car unsuitable for public roads. Another story tells of a buyer furious that his brand new L88 couldn't idle properly in traffic, stalling at every red light. Dealers caught in the middle quietly bought back cars or swapped them for tamer Corvettes. But here's the twist. Chevrolet never backed down. They insisted the L88 wasn't meant for ordinary use, and buyers had been warned if they bothered to read the fine print. In other words, Chevy's defense was simple. We told you not to drive it on the street. That cold response only deepened the legend. The L88 wasn't just fast, it was untouchable, even in the courts. If you weren't ready for it, that was your fault. Number 7. Among Corvette fanatics, there's a myth that refuses to die: the cursed L88s. According to whispers in the community, a handful of the 20 cars built in 1967 were plagued with misfortune. Owners crashed them within weeks, engines seized for no apparent reason. One was said to have caught fire in a garage, burning the house to the ground. Skeptics dismiss these as coincidences. After all, the L88 was an extreme machine, high-strung, unforgiving, and often driven by people who didn't understand it. But the stories persist. Collectors trade VIN numbers like ghost stories, warning each other of cars you don't want to own. The myth goes even further. Some believe Chevrolet knew which cars were cursed, based on flawed castings or experimental parts. Did the factory quietly mark certain vans as unlucky? No one knows for sure. What we do know is that the legend of the cursed L88s adds a supernatural edge to an already fearsome car. For some, owning one isn't just a badge of pride, it's tempting fate. Number 6. The L88 Corvette wasn't just fast. It was built to embarrass legends. In the late 1960s, European sports cars like Ferrari and Porsche ruled endurance racing. Shelby Cobras had made waves, but Corvette still carried a stigma. It was seen as Detroit Flash, not a true competitor. The L88 changed that. With its aluminum heads, transistor ignition, and monstrous torque, the L88 had endurance racing DNA. Privateer teams entered them in events like the 24 Hours of Daytona and Sebring, where they shocked the world by not just keeping up with, but sometimes beating, European machines costing twice as much. Drivers spoke of the L88's brutal power on straights, rocketing past rivals like a cannonball. Its biggest enemy wasn't Ferrari or Porsche, it was its own heat. Engines ran so hot that mechanics had to invent new cooling tricks just to keep them alive for 12 or 24 hours. But when they lasted, they won. The L88 wasn't just a Corvette, it was the car that forced Europe to take America's sports car seriously. And it did so without Chevrolet ever officially admitting it was meant to race. Number 5. By 1967, the Corvette L88 had already sparked something bigger than racing. It ignited a cultural panic. Across the country, newspapers were sounding alarms. Editorials warned of supercars putting deadly speed into the hands of teenagers. Safety advocates pointed fingers at Detroit for selling what they called legalized missiles. And at the top of their list, the Corvette. The L88 was never advertised, but word spread quickly among gearheads. They knew it was faster than anything Chevy had ever built. And once those whispers hit the mainstream, the Corvette became a target. Insurance companies blacklisted it. Politicians cited it in speeches. Even parents forbade their kids from hanging around owners who drove one. The irony: the panic only fueled demand. The more society labeled it dangerous, the more desirable it became. Corvette owners weren't just drivers, they were rebels, outlaws, warriors against the system. The L88 wasn't just a car, it was forbidden fruit, wrapped in fiberglass. And nothing makes something sweeter than being told you can't have it. Number 4. Few people realize how close the L88 came to never being born at all. Inside General Motors, the corporate ban on racing was still in effect. Executives feared lawsuits, government crackdowns, and public backlash. On paper, Chevrolet was supposed to stay far away from competition. The accountants agreed. Racing was expensive, and the Corvette wasn't exactly a volume seller. But then came the mutiny. Engineers, backed quietly by dealers who needed a halo car to draw people into showrooms, refused to let Corvette fall behind. They argued that without a racing pedigree, the Corvette would become just another sports car, a pretty toy with no teeth. Against executive orders, they pushed the L88 into existence. Not as a factory race car, but as a production option. It was a clever disguise. Chevrolet could claim innocence while handing racers the weapons they needed. In other words, the L88 wasn't born from corporate strategy. It was born from rebellion within GM itself, a secret uprising that slipped a monster onto the streets. Number 3. On the street, the L88 became an urban legend, because not all of them were created equal. With only 20 built, each car had its quirks. Some seemed unbeatable, pulling away from rivals as if possessed. Others were temperamental, stalling, overheating, or refusing to run properly unless tuned with surgical precision. Street racers whispered about factory freaks, L88s that had been assembled with hand-picked parts, or engines that had been blueprinted in secret. One rumor claimed that certain cars left the factory with closer to 600 horsepower, slipped quietly into the hands of favored racers. No proof ever surfaced, but the stories stuck. And because the L88 was so rare, each one carried its own myth. Which one had the secret horsepower? Which one had the cursed vine? Which one had been destined for a track, only to be sold to an unsuspecting civilian? That unpredictability made the L88 more than a car. It was a gamble, a legend in steel and fiberglass. Every sighting at a drag strip carried mystery. Was this just another Corvette, or was it one of the chosen few? Number 2, by the late 1980s, the legend of the 1967 Corvette L88 had grown far. Beyond the 20 cars actually built, auction houses began buzzing with whispers of the million-dollar Corvette. Collectors who had dismissed the L88 as too harsh, too impractical, suddenly realized its rarity. While Mustangs and Camaros were still trading for modest sums, L88 prices skyrocketed. Why? Because the numbers were impossible to ignore. Only 20 cars in 1967, each one built with racing DNA, each one wrapped in controversy and secrecy. And unlike many muscle cars of the era, the L88's performance was no myth. Dynos, race results, and survivor stories all confirmed. This was no ordinary Corvette. By the early 2000s, pristine L88s were commanding over $3 million at auction. That made it one of the most expensive American production cars of all time. The twist? Many owners who bought them new had once been disappointed, angry about no radio, no heater, no comfort. Decades later, those same flaws became proof of authenticity, driving values into the stratosphere. The L88 wasn't just rare, it was a time capsule, a reminder that true legends are often misunderstood at birth. Number 1. The most shocking truth about the 1967 Corvette L88 is this: it was never meant for us. Chevrolet didn't build it for commuters or even for wealthy collectors. They built it for racers. It was supposed to live on tracks, not boulevards. It was supposed to win trophies, not cruise to drive-ins. And yet, a few slipped through the cracks, sold to unsuspecting civilians, driven on city streets, parked in garages where kids gawked at the badges, not realizing what they were looking at. That's what makes the L88 so mythical today. It wasn't a mass-market car. It wasn't even really a production car in the traditional sense. It was a loophole, a rebellion, a secret racing weapon disguised as a Corvette, only 20 in 1967. That scarcity, combined with its brutal nature, cemented it as not just a Corvette legend, but the Corvette legend. So what do we make of it all? The 1967 Corvette L88 wasn't a car built to be loved. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't easy. It wasn't even honest. Chevrolet lied about its horsepower, hid its purpose, and warned buyers not to drive it on the street. And yet that's exactly why it endures. The L88 wasn't just another muscle car. It was the forbidden Corvette, the one Chevrolet tried to keep in the shadows, the one too powerful for its own time. The one so rare, so uncompromising that even today it stands apart from every other machine of the era. When people think of the Corvette's legacy, they think of sleek lines, fiberglass curves, and thunderous V8s. But when collectors whisper about the greatest Corvette of them all, one name always rises above the rest: L88. It was never supposed to be yours. That's why it became unforgettable.